Mr. Crow, I think you should do this. You can do the beginnings this time.
Okay, yeah. So, Jesse, Quinn, thank you very much for being with us this fine Friday afternoon in May. I have known you for a long time, although hopefully the two things weren't related. You were living just down the road from my workshop, weren't you, when we met? Yeah. And then in fairly short order, you moved to Suffolk. So I'm hoping that the two weren't related.
It was the noise.
Yeah, exactly. Well, nowadays that could be Matt as well as me, because he's in the same unit as me.
That is true.
When I met you, you had just joined Keane, I think, playing bass and bits of keys and stuff. Would that be about right? It's long. I was trying to work out how long ago that was. It was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
6 years, 5 years?
Well, I started playing with Keane in 2007. So,
no.
Yeah. So I think I would have met you in, like 10 years ago, I reckon. Easily.
Goodness me. I can't believe that time has gone that quickly.
Well, we haven't aged 10 years, have we? You know, we look amazing.
I've not aged no more than 15 years in those last 10 years, I should think. I had a red beard when you met me. Now I look more like Santa Claus.
I think it looks better now. You rock it.
Still glorious.
You're very sweet. Thank you. So I don't know whether you've heard any of the podcasts that we've done preceding this, but basically the vibe is get you to talk about how you got into music when you were younger, and then kind of how you got into playing in bands and all that kind of stuff, and then trials and tribulations of getting to the goal that you were aiming at. And then sort of how you've dealt with it. I mean, you had a really interesting right hand, left hand turn after Keane, because they kind of went on hiatus just after you joined as a full member, didn't you? And then you were out in Suffolk and had to. But let's not jump ahead, because I don't want to steal any punchlines. But so you're as a kid. How did you get into music? Was there music in the house? Like, did you have musician parents, or they were into music?
Yeah, I mean, my mum's a singer and my dad was a sound engineer, and he also was a production manager for festivals and stuff. So I spent, my childhood like traveling around doing festivals and being at gigs, and just being familiar with having instruments around, I guess. And that was normal. But it was only, I think I was 8, and I heard a friend of mine just sitting at a drum kit going boom, bap, boom, boom, bap, boom. And I thought, well, that's actually like a drum beat, but I reckon I could do that. So she showed me how to do it, and that was I was just off, And my dad and my mum, they were brilliant at sort of spotting that it was something that I was, kind of instantly obsessed with, that could have a positive role in my life. So they, I remember Dad coming home with this ride cymbal that someone had chucked in a skip, because they'd hit it so hard it hadn't cracked, it flipped inside out. So it was like, and I remember him coming home and being like, I brought you a cymbal. And I was really excited, and he sort of pulled the cymbal out, and I was like, it's inside out, for God's sake. And he got a towel over the top of the banisters and just went bang with it and popped it the right way again. I was like, okay, fair enough. I felt quite inspired by that. I thought, oh, you can make good with whatever you got. So yeah, got well into playing the drums. And
what do you think it was about when you heard that, when you heard the friend playing the drums? What was it that connected with you? Because obviously, if you've been around festivals and had instruments around the house, what was it that suddenly made it engaging for you?
It's a really good
That's a
question.
hard question. It's a really hard question, and it's a question that really fascinates me, because the relationship between talent and hard work is something that has kind of come back to me a lot in my life in lots of different areas. But there is always a huge drive and desire and just captivation when someone masters something and is drawn to something. And I really want to. I've never had an answer, and I can't answer it. But if you could kind of speak to that, it would be fascinating.
I suppose when you're, say you're like 7 or 8 years old, like I was, when I suddenly connected with it, because it was normal around, in my life there to be instruments around and stuff. It was just part of one of those many things that adults do that you are aware that they're doing. Do you know what I mean? Or don't have much interest in, perhaps. It's just, it's like, well, I don't really know how my mum cooks supper, but she does.
Yeah.
I don't really know how this guy is playing a Hammond organ with the sort of spinning bits and stuff, but there's sound coming out. But it's a grown-up thing. It's beyond my, reach. So I think when I heard my friend, she was probably 5 years older than me. When I heard her just doing this beat that I could tell was a beat, but was, kind of like the most simple thing you could do with an instrument, I thought, actually, I can, this is like not as complicated as I thought maybe. And like, if I could do that, I could join in with something and like be a part of it maybe.
So it's almost like an attainability. Suddenly you can see a pathway into being able to be part of that thing that you thought was other and separate from you and unattainable.
Yeah, also, I mean, it makes it like a really loud, wicked sound.
Yes,
so like an 8-year-old
boy.
And you can see, like, if I was that age and I plugged the guitar into a loud amp, I mean, it would just be horrendous. But to be able to sit down and make like a racket and do it like in a way that was actually sounded all right. I mean, that's pretty, that definitely appealed to me. But it was interesting because when I was, when you're that age, your music taste is really just your parents' taste, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we kind of like gradually got a drum kit together, and a friend of my dad's, David Hughes, who's like a drummer in the local rock and roll band, gave me a couple of lessons, but he was like sort of teaching me how to play like prefab Sprout drum beats and stuff. And I didn't, do you know what I mean? I didn't have any, I was like interested in the rhythm and learning how to be able to do it, but I didn't have any interest in the music at all. And it was only when but I was really interested in I suppose being able to sort of structure beats and make and coordinate things to make a sound that was pleasing. It was only when I was about 11, maybe 10 or 11, that a friend that my dad worked with played me. He goes, if you're into drums, you've got to listen to John Bonham. And I was like, go on. He put on Good Times, Bad Times, and that was it for me. I mean, I don't think I would consider myself to have ever become like a massive Led Zeppelin fan, but I remember hearing, that dum dum, start and just being like, this is also sort of weirdly attainable and like something, like I can play this, what he's doing, but this is this cool, massive thing. And up to that point, I've been playing along to like, Van Morrison and the Stones and stuff, and probably like not even the better end of their back catalogue. So I think that was that was the point that I was like, music is it, Not long after that, I started picking up guitars and basses and keyboards and all that kind of stuff.
And were there any instruments? So obviously the drums were the first thing that you picked up and that you were drawn to, and you've kind of spoken about why you were drawn to that. Why did you feel that you wanted to pick up other instruments? Was it like you felt like you wanted to be more melodic, or what? What was the motivation for that, or was it just because they were there?
Well, the next thing that I think it's partly kind of laziness. I went in order of how difficult things seemed. So so the next thing I picked up was the bass, or I didn't. I thought my mum had this like really lovely old 12-string acoustic guitar. She didn't play it that much, and I found out that the bass was the first 4 strings of a guitar basically. And my godfather was a bass player in the same band as the guy who taught me drums. And so I just took all the strings apart from the bottom 4 thickest off my mum's 12-string, which she was not happy about.
I can imagine that.
She was like, I remember her basically being like, well, it'll be easier to tune. And just started trying to play, you know, like the most, again, accessible thing that can make you feel like you're sort of that you're getting a result. Things like give me some loving, do 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 dum do 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 do, you know, stuff that's super easy. And then borrowed a bass off some, you know, like a neighbour, and then put 2 strings back on the guitar. And Mum taught me GDC. Again, it's just the simplest. It's just laziness, the simplest way. And I was like, you know, hey, can you show me how to play the guitar then? So she said, well, if I show you how to play G, D, and C, then you can play Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan. And I remember, so she played me that, and she showed me the chords, and she said, you have to practice them a while to be able to play them, and your fingers will be sore. And I thought, listening to it, I was like, oh, if I can play the guitar on that, then I could play the drums, the bass, and the guitar on it. And then I'll be able to make, you know, if I had like something to record on, I could make a whole song up, you know. So did that, and, you know, at that point, the same thing. I was starting to get my own musical taste, I guess, and listen to, like a lot of, you know, kids in the 90s, I listened to a lot of stuff like Smashing Pumpkins and things like that. And again, through the sort of, you know, line of least resistance approach to learning, I started getting tab books and things, and yeah.
Nice. So what other kind of bands were you listening to? Did you was it Pumpkins and stuff? Was it do you go down the 90s Britpop wave, or, you know, what were you listening to?
I mean, I sort of always had a frustratingly diverse taste in music, because it means that when I'm making music, if it's something rocky, I start wanting to listen to hip hop, and if it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I definitely, I was really fixated on, I guess, on what it means to have a role in a band. So I was really interested in things like, you know, like why is the guitar louder there, or, you know, why the drums stopped playing, or, like, you know, listening to Nirvana, and I was like, why is the guitar all clean in the verse? So I was very, like, really fixated on that side of music, and I think that meant that in terms of like my own taste, I just found there was so many line of least resistance roads into like different genres. You know, hip hop is like, can be the most simple thing in the world. Rock can be the most simple thing in the world, but you can hear in that real simple stuff, you can hear like people's sort of duties and responsibilities within the band, and I was always really interested, having, you know, like a mum who was a singer and songwriter, and, you know, everything she told me was about, you know, serving the song. So if the best thing is just to have like a blip and someone barking, and that's what it's got to be, then that's the song, and that's all you do, you know. And if it needs to be like a symphony orchestra, then that's what you do. So I had that from one parent, and then my dad was, you know, not musical at all. Couldn't, you know, he could play one note on the piano and make it sound bad, but he would play like, it's quite amazing. But he would he would approach music from this, you know, like kind of construction worker attitude of, right, we're going to turn up the channel with the kick drum, and we're going to turn up the channel with the snare drum, you know, from his sound work, and also gave me an interest in the technology side of music, and, you know, like how much impact it can make to have the right tool for what you're trying to express. So, yeah, I don't really know. I can't remember what the question was now.
So that's all good. It was a good answer for whatever it was.
Something that you've kind of spoken about there when you were talking was, which is quite interesting to me anyway, as someone who always recorded by myself, playing to varying degrees of terribleness, all the instruments. You develop, like you were saying, if there's a blip there or there's a little bit there, and how you serve the song. When you're playing everything yourself, there's no ego about the guitar needs to be louder because I'm the guitarist, or the drums need to be louder because I'm the drummer.
Yeah.
When you grow up writing songs on your own and producing songs on your own, then you just do what you think is right at that point in the song for that instrument. What's that instrument supposed to be doing at that point? Or, you know, what feeling am I trying to create at that point? And that's an invaluable lesson and I guess probably from your dad's point of view as well, the kind of construction point of view, that's again a degree of production, isn't it? Because you're trying to structure this thing so that it's coherent and it is listenable, you know, that it's attractive to listen to, because if it doesn't sound nice, then people are just going to turn it off. And all of that stuff, definitely, it has to make you a much more rounded musician that can slot into bands more easily than someone who's just grown up wanting to be, name that, guitarist or bassist or drummer, because they just want to show you how good they are. And that's not really great in a band context.
Yeah, I think it gives you that. I think if I had to say like what my skill is as a musician, it's from that background and all those little contributing factors. I feel like I can switch kind of mode. You know, I could turn up at a session with a drum kit, and people would think I was a drummer. They wouldn't think I could also play other instruments. And if I turn up with a bass or a guitar or whatever, I feel like, you know, maybe I'm not the most flashy player on anything, but I can sort of switch into that mindset and kind of mode without too much difficulty. And but the only thing that I've always wondered about with when you make something completely on your own is, if you're part of a band, you've got one job, you know, like, so if, like with Keane, I'm like, right, I've got to do the best bass line that I can for this song. You know, I need to stay out of the way of the song. I've got to tie the rhythm to the melody. I've got to do what needs to be done. And I'll put, you know, effort into making that happen. Whereas if you're recording everything yourself, you might just end up sort of undercooking each part. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm doing everything myself, I try and keep that same mentality of like, I've got to make this part count and be relevant, or it shouldn't be there, you know.
As a devil's advocate point to that, I have found, like, in some of my songs, I've written completely ridiculous parts for, let's say, take an instrument, the bass, and therefore the guitar has to sort of fit around the part that I wrote for the bass. It's not the part that a bass player would have come up writing in a band context. Yeah. And so that can sometimes, and you wouldn't necessarily have the freedom to do that in particularly a young band, because they're like, well, I'm the guitarist, you know, that's the bit that I normally do. You can't do that. Perhaps when bands get a bit older and they're more egalitarian about things, perhaps they may not come at it like that. But in terms of it's got to be the absolute best part for its situation in the song. 100% agree.
Yeah, it does take a certain amount of maturity to know when to not play at all, doesn't it?
It does. Is that ever the case though?
I'm just like constantly
not so
moving all over everything.
More notes the better.
More is more.
Exactly. And so, if you kind of grew up in this slightly independent situation where you were able to have a musical existence outside of the context of other bands, when did you sort of jump into or think it would be fun to start up some sort of a band with other people?
I mean, high school, start of high school, like lots of kids. So I turned up in whatever it is, year 7, already a pretty competent drummer, and confident, because I think one of the things that helped me in my personal situation was with my dad's work, was that constantly being at gigs and sound checks and stuff, he was always saying, get up and sound check the kit, you get up there. Or he'd be asking the drummer, can he ever go? And so I got really confident at just sort of getting up there. Whereas with other things I feel a bit more sort of unsure, or uneasy. So I went into high school like, I'm, feeling like I'm a good drummer. I'm sure I'm a good enough drummer to play, to sort of compare myself with the older kids, and promptly joined this band playing bass. I don't even know why.
Logical step.
But what was brilliant was, so there's these kids in like year 9, so a couple of years older, and for some reason, I have no idea, I was probably like instantly trying to hang around the music rooms all the time. They said, oh, do you want to play bass in our band? This young, sort of first year, or whatever they call it. And they were playing Paradise City. And the guy who's playing the drums, this guy, Tom, he was like, it's the only beat that I can do, so it's the only song we play. And I was like, oh, all right. I said, well, can you play any other instruments? And he was like, well, I can play the bass. I sort of, meekly put my hand up and said, do you think it might make more sense for me to play the drums and Tom to play the bass? So we swapped round and then started playing, like Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff. Because
that's really easy on the bass.
Yeah. Oh, we play some awful music, but we definitely were the rock end of the spectrum, like lots of teenage bands. So my drumming was getting very kind of agricultural, and and a bit kind of like almost too rocky, but with no real finesse. And so my dad very wisely said, look, there's this woman up the road, she's about 3/4 hour drive away, who she's quite a famous jazz double bass player. And I was like, he's like, she's really old, she's teaches young kids to play jazz. And I was like, I'm not interested remotely. But he said, well, that's tough, you're going. He basically said to me, I remember saying, look, if you want to be a really good drummer and just play rock, it will help you if you know how to put a little bit of, know when to swing a bit if you need to, or like add some ghost notes. I said, and I was playing like stuff from the Black Album by Metallica. So he took me off to this crazy lady in this barn up in near Norfolk, and she basically would organise young musicians by ability and teach them how to play jazz. And it was honestly the best thing my dad ever did for me. It absolutely took me from being someone that could like hold tempo and play, copy beats from records, into being a musician, like a proper musician. And from that, realizing that I actually had quite a deep love of like, all kinds of other stuff, funk and like listening to things like the meters and stuff, and realizing, this is like outrageous drumming, but so simple. Like again, like line of least resistance. So yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it helped me become a much better drummer, but it also made life harder for me as a musician, because I suddenly had to, was interested in too many things. Whereas if your passion is like building guitar amps, you're not going to be like, well, at the same time, I really want to start repairing motorbikes and building hovercraft. And, it's great to have one thing and do it really well, rather than be, as they say, a jack of all trades and master of none.
Mm. What was I going to say? Did you, at the time where you started doing lessons with this jazz double bassist, you said your drumming was a bit agricultural, or was becoming rather agricultural. Did the light suddenly kind of go on about groove and like where you place all of the different beats, like before, after, and all of that swing and stuff? Did the light suddenly come on? Can you pinpoint a time where the light came on that, or was it just a gradual process throughout being mentored by her?
I think it was probably fairly gradual, but what was nice about it was I was meeting other kids whose parents had been like, "You're going." So we started forming our own bands, sort of separate, to her work, and mainly with a sort of, one foot still in that world, that jazz world. So we were playing Herbie Hancock and the meters and stuff like that, and more the kind of sort of funk direction. Yeah. And we also realized that that girls like those gigs a lot more than the heavy metal ones.
Yeah.
So the heavy metal gigs would be like, sort of our mates just kind of stood there nodding their heads, and then the funk gigs, we'd have like every single person dancing, and then we'd get all our friends, girlfriends, to dance on our amps and stuff like that as a kind of extra, thing to get people going. And it was just a lot more fun, but also not really as rewarding musically for me personally, I don't think.
But do you think you learn an element of performance during those kind of gigs which you perhaps wouldn't, or a different aspect of performance than in the metal gigs? Because the crowd interaction is very different between the two gigs.
I think what I quickly realised that I don't like is like pomp in music. Do you know what I mean? I don't like. I realised very quickly, like, as much as I loved bands like Metallica and stuff, the performances were quite kind of pompous and it, I guess egotistical. But then, in the same way, so were a lot of the sort of jazz gigs that I was getting involved with playing at. And so I think what I loved about the sort of funk stuff is you felt like it was kind of, everyone was there just to have a good time. And you felt like it didn't really, no one was really paying much attention to who was on the stage because they were just busy dancing.
Yeah.
That's definitely stuck with me. I really like that. And it's one of the things that I find most weird about stepping out on a big stage with Keane or whatever, is that sort of sense that
worship.
You're slightly posturing or something, and that everyone's there to see the band and hear the music rather than just because they're out for a good night.
Yeah.
But I can live with it.
Yeah.
You can swallow that jagged pill.
Yeah.
Good on you.
The master.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was playing in covers bands and things, and it was always, I was in a Guilty Pleasures kind of function band thing, and it was kind of a reason certain songs were chosen. It was quite a hard lesson to learn for me. I was just like, well, I want to play this because I really like it. and then the rest of the guys would be like, the girls aren't going to like that. And it was literally, if you can get the girls up and dancing, everybody would follow, and then you'd end up with a
great
packed
gig.
dance floor. Exactly. So that's it is that bit where music is to be enjoyed as well as analysed and all that kind of other thing. But it's just there to bit of escapism, just to have a nice time.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's really hard to please everyone. If it's in a sort of originals gig, you feel like there is a percentage of that audience that wants to hear like some deep cuts, but getting that balance right is really hard. And even playing for the right amount of time without some people feeling like, all right, I've had enough, and others being like, this is awesome. Yeah, it's a real balancing act.
Did you see the Glastonbury set / 2 sets? That was. Did you see the Cure's set at Glastonbury last year?
I did, yeah, on TV. Yeah, I loved that it was so understated. I thought, it didn't feel pompous at all.
Yeah, and the fact that they did all of those like hardcore fan favourites as almost like the first half of the set, and then they played all the pop songs the second half of the set. I thought that was, you've got to be pretty confident in the people who are watching to be able to pull that off, I think. Because a lot, I mean, I don't know how many thousands of people are standing there in it wasn't muddy that year, but wanting you to play the hits, but their performance is just so good and captivating that he could sing Postman Pat for 35 minutes and everyone would love it.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about The Cure. With the last Keane album we were making, we were working with this guy David Coston, who I'm sure you can come across.
Yeah, lovely chap.
Yeah, he's great. We were at Assault and Battery up in Kensal. No, where is it? I can't remember. Wilson. So, Flood and Alan Moulder's place, and awesome studio. And David said, we didn't really want to sort of pay to have techs there because it just seems like a waste of time and money. But Richard, our drummer, always quite likes to have, because there's so much swapping toms and kicks and snares and stuff, he always quite likes to have someone around when we're doing like full-on drum days. So David said, I've got a friend who's brilliant at tuning drums, can we get him along? He's a lovely guy. So this sort of like very sweet dude was there on day one, and Richard's like, I want that bass drum please, and I'll have that over there, and can I have this here, and such, and treating him like a roadie. And said, so who do you usually work with? And he's like, well, I play drums in The Cure.
Jason.
Jason, exactly. We're
Jason,
so sorry.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
We couldn't believe it. We could not believe it. And it was like, do you just want to you could just play instead if you want. he could not have been sweeter. He was just such a lovely guy. And did a really good job just getting the drums tuned up really well as well.
He is super. This is going to be
you've done all robotic.
Clanging name 1998. I think I've got interweb troubles this end. Can you hear me now? Is it any better?
Yeah, you're good.
So I met Jason in 1998 at Mute Records recording studios where I was working at the time. Reeves Gabrels, who now plays in The Cure, was in with David Bowie doing a song, and Jason came in and played on the cut. Did they do more than one? I think on that day it was only one. But I think he'd just joined The Cure, and I guess he was probably 4 years older than me, and I was a tape op in a studio. But could not have been nicer, was interested in who I was and what I was into, and music, you know, the music that I was into, and was giving advice and all that kind of stuff. So he could have been the biggest headed person in the world because he just started playing drums for The Cure, but none of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just fantastic.
We're all in the same boat, really, aren't we?
Yeah. In fact, just be nice, really, and nice things will happen.
Yeah.
Simple rule.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah. I wish more
Easier
people
said than done.
Yeah. Tell me that.
Oh, it's amazing. But
so no, go on.
no, you're good. I'm sure yours is you're cleverer than I am, so it'd be a better question.
I don't believe that for a second, but I'll ask my question anyway. How did you? Because did you grow up in Suffolk?
Yeah, grew up in a kind of, you know, in the pre-internet world of rural England, which was different to how it is here now. You know, felt very isolated and remote, and I loved it as well.
Sure. And so how yeah, I've frozen again. I'm freezing all over the place today. What was I going to say now? Oh, how did you end up coming down to London? Because I assume you probably moved to London at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of kids in like I say, pre-internet Suffolk. As soon as school was out, I was out of here. I went straight to Bristol with a girl I was seeing at the time, and she was going to uni, and I decided that I just wanted to get straight into doing music. And so we moved down to Bristol and lived there for a few years, and then sort of gradually decided, well, London's probably a better place to be if I want to make a living out of doing music. Because Bristol's amazing, but it feels a bit like living in a village after a couple of years, you know. And so, yeah, ended up in London.
And what kind of music projects were you working on while you were in Bristol? Were you doing bandy things or sessioning around, or
I had this sort of very naive idea that I would just end up in a successful band, you know, like a touring signed band at some point, because, you know, like, why not? And I didn't realize that you actually had to try and make that happen. So so the first thing I did was I went and worked in the studio with a singer who was basically a private studio that this manager guy, he wasn't even a manager, he was a real proper Bristolian old boy. He'd got some money and he set the studio up for this singer who was an amazing singer. And he paid me full time to write and record tracks, demos, I guess, with this singer. And so I very quickly, I mean, I had sort of good foundation knowledge of lots of the things that I needed for that job, but I very quickly had to learn about things like synth and stuff like that, and syncing tape machines and computers, and, you know, MIDI and all sorts of stuff that I hadn't been particularly interested in before. So it was really good in some ways. And then, yeah, I ended up, the girl that I was going out with, we ended up splitting up, as quite often is the case when you're that age. And I moved in above this great pub called the Old Duke, which is basically a sort of old school jazz pub, but like trad jazz, and just a brilliant pub. And the landlord was only 27, and he just let us do whatever we want. You know, we'd stay up till 7 o'clock in the morning every night, and just take over the pub and get all our friends in and play music together, with loads of musicians around. Yeah, just go around. We had a band called the Dukes of Wok and Bowl because we lived at the Old Duke, and our first gig was at a noodle bar. And so we used to carry our gear around Bristol, and we'd turn up in pubs and well, anywhere, and say, oh, you know, if you feed us or give us beer, we'll pack the place out. And so they'd say, oh, well, can you know, who are you going to bring? We said, oh, don't worry about that. So we just ring all our mates up, and it was great fun. But like I say, that it's sort of that way of life ran out of steam a bit. I realised, you can't just live in a pub and drink all night every night if you want to do anything particularly meaningful musically. So off I toddled to London. Skint. I borrowed the money for the train ticket. Funnily enough, I said I've got to get out of here. I'm going to London. I hadn't got any money at all, so I borrowed 30 quid to get the train off a friend of mine. I saw her like 10 years later, and I said, "Oh, you lent me that money to get the train to London. Do you remember?" She's like, "How much? Can you drop it off at my house?" I was like, "Okay." So I went and dropped it off in an envelope. But yeah.
That's very funny.
So what happened when you got to London then, with no money and all that?
I knew a friend, someone who'd been in Bristol. I knew where she lived, and I knew she lived in one of those she was Kiwi, and she lived in one of those flats. It's basically like a 3-bedroom flat with sort of 40 Aussie and Kiwis living in it. And on Edgware Road. So I thought, well, I'll get the train to Paddington. And I looked at the map. I thought I can just walk to Edgware Road from there, knock on the door, and she'll give me a sofa to sleep on. So I turned up. I thought, I'll be able to find a job really easily. If not, I'll just sign on. Well, I cocked that up because I quit my job, so they wouldn't let me sign on. I turned up at her house with literally just like nothing at all. And she let me sleep. There was already someone sleeping on the sofa, so she let me sleep behind the sofa. And I said, "Oh, you haven't got any food? I'm so hungry." She goes, I remember her saying, "I've got a bottle of Cointreau you can have."
It's nutritious.
So give me a bottle of Cointreau, and I had 30p. So I managed to buy a loaf of bread for 30p from somewhere, and I managed to make this loaf of bread and bottle of Cointreau last me about a week. And then I spoke to my mum on the phone. She said, "What are you doing? You haven't got work. What are you living on?" I said, "It's all right. I've got a loaf of bread and a bottle of Cointreau that I'm working my way through." She turned up at Liverpool Street on the train about 2 hours later.
Oh, God bless mums.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So what happened after that? I mean, presumably the Cointreau came to an end. And obviously your mum came and subbed you a little bit, but how did you get any kind of work, and how did that move forward?
So my next, God, this is detailed. My next thought was, well, there's not much of a music scene on Edgware Road. I should be in Camden. That's where all the bands are. So I went up to Camden, and when I was walking up the street, and I saw this pub that had a, live-in bar staff wanted, and I thought, I've basically run a pub in Bristol. This will be a doddle. Went in, and there's, this old Paddy guy called Paddy, actually, who ran the place. He basically said, you get all the food you can eat, and you get a room which was shared with this really sort of dry Polish guy called Marius. He goes, you get a bed and you get all the food you can eat, and you've got to do 2 shifts a week. And I thought, that sounds amazing. So I got myself set up there, and then signed up to put a load of notes up and around looking for musicians, and got a little band together. But the only problem with that setup was I didn't actually earn any money. I was getting food and board, but I didn't have any money at all, in any way, shape or form. So because it was only 2 shifts a week, I thought, well, I'll go and get another job. I'll try and find something music related. So I ended up getting a job behind the bar at the Jazz Cafe around the corner. Because I thought this is the best of both worlds. We've got all the kind of the wicked, sort of like heavy American jazz musicians turning up at the Jazz Cafe, and then all the kind of like old school punks with Coca-Cola in their hair in Camden. Thought this is really exciting, but the problem was they did their rota before the rota for the place where I lived, and the landlord at the place I lived you know, he said, right, here's the rotor. I said, I can't work that shift because I've got a shift at the Jazz Cafe. And he's like, oh, no problem. Get your stuff out by tomorrow morning.
Oh dear.
So he just kicked me out. And the sound engineer at the Jazz Cafe was like, oh, you can come and crash in my spare bedroom for a while until you get yourself back on your feet and find some, you know, something that was paid enough to pay the rent. Anyway, I didn't realise he was hoping that it would lead to something between he and I, which I was not interested in. And when he found out that wasn't the case, because I started turning up with my girlfriend, he promptly booted me out as well.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, no.
But by that time, I'd got this little band together, and we decided to get a flat together. And I'd found a job at Matt Snowball Music. You must know Matt Snowballs.
Yeah.
So I turned up, was like, when I was in Bristol, I'd taken all the money I'd got saved up, and I bought a 1963 AC30 in like immaculate condition. That was, I think I paid like 700 quid for it, which seems mad now. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to get a flat, I've got to get a deposit and everything. And I think our guitarist had 2 amps. So I took this AC30, which had a flight case and everything, and I wheeled it down the road to Matt Snowballs and said, oh, you know, to the reception, oh, is Matt here? You know, never met him before. He's quite canny. He's quite a canny dude. And so he came downstairs, and he's like 6'6" or whatever. And he said, so I've got this amp, do you want to buy it? He's like, I'll give you 500 quid for it. And I was like, forget about it. So I said, oh, I can't sell it for that. And he goes, well, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm looking for work. I'm a musician, play different instruments, and I know how to, you know, mix and stuff like that. And so he said, oh, you know, do you want a job? You can come and work in the warehouse, just prepping gear to come in and out and doing PA work. So I thought, well, actually, if I do that, I can do the band at the same time and get a flat. So I started doing that, and absolutely loved it. And met, you know, through that was meeting loads of interesting people and crew and stuff with different people, and also could borrow whatever I wanted. That was one of the perks. Nice. You could borrow whatever you wanted. You're supposed to only have it for a night. I'd sort of hang on to stuff until I'd see it come up on the hire thing. So you go into this sort of flat that was something like out of with Mel and I, and we'd all be like eating, you know, sort of sharing a slice of bread, but we have loads of like 60s Gibsons hanging on the wall.
Nice, it's the way it should be, right?
That's a good, you inadvertently kind of stumbled into the epicenter of touring. You could, arguably the epicenter of touring in London, because Brewery Road, John Henry's, Matt Snowball, a lot of people go through there, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I loved meeting all the crew guys that started, you know, that were turning up, fixing things and getting stuff ready for tour. Because obviously there's storage cages there as well, and also like just tour buses pulling up outside with trailers and like loading stuff up for tours. I thought, oh wow, that's, you know, like that is a lifestyle. You know, at that point I was still just interested in like whether we could make the leap from the Dublin Castle to the Barfly, you know. Yeah. So yeah, it was lovely, and again, as you guys know, in the music industry, there's just so many brilliant, lovely people, and you know, they'd sort of say, oh, we're chucking out, you know, I'm chucking out this guitar case. Do you want it? You can put your, you know, had a gig bag or whatever. All these dudes would sort of recognise the fact that I was a young, struggling musician, and they'd give me cool old bits and bobs and, you know, packs of strings and stuff. It's great.
Yeah. That's really nice. So when did you start sort of leaving the job? When did you start being able to make your way just with like the more music side of things, as opposed to, you know, the jobbing side of stuff?
So I wanted to do more music, and I worked out I could probably work a little bit less and still pay the rent. So I went to Matt and said, you know, I don't want to quit, but I want to work. I want to change my hours. You sort of, I was quite, didn't really think about it at the time, but I was like, he said, well, what do you want? What are you proposing? I said, well, I just kind of want to work whatever days I want. And he's like, right. But we came up with an arrangement and that worked. And so very well for a while. And so I started doing a bit more music and stuff. But then I also realised like it would be great to actually get on the tour and try and get a bit closer to and that world, and see if maybe somewhere I could find a band that I could join or something. So I thought, well, I'll go freelance, because I know a bunch of crew now. I'm sure I'll be able to get a job. And again, it's just youth, isn't it? Like I just quit. I didn't even. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was just like, right, who's gonna, what are you gonna do about the rent? I was like, don't worry about it. And also had a factor in the fact that you go and do a tour for a month and then you get paid, a month after that. So she was working at the BBC and had a good job, and was fine about it all. And she said, you better pull something out of the hat. And so day one of being freelance, I said, right, I'll get a job today. So I made a CV and I emailed it to everyone that I knew through Matt Snowballs and whatever. And I also emailed it to every, do you remember the White Book? Mm-hmm. It's like the yellow pages of music. I emailed it to every management company I could find. And stupidly, I should have said, musician, like gun for hire or whatever, but I didn't. I said backline tech and sound engineer for hire, right. Which was silly, but it, it all worked out. But that first day, I got asked if I wanted to go on tour teching for Jeff Beck. Got offered to, so it would have been. It was like it was for drums and bass or something for Jeff Beck. I remember it being like Omar Hakim and like Pino or something like that. Absolutely ridiculous.
Wow.
And so I got
no pressure.
Yeah, and I got offered a guitar teching for one of the guitarists for Maximo Park, and I got offered tour manager and front of house for this band called the Papini Sisters, who were kind of like the Andrews Sisters. Yeah, but they played like Blondie, but like 3-part 40s jazz. And I thought, well, actually, that one sounds like it would be really fun, and they weren't so busy that I would just be like permanently away. I thought if I start working for one of these other lots, these other two, I'll be gone, Mm-hmm. So I started working for them and loved it. It was absolutely brilliant fun. They were sort of touring just enough for it to be exciting, but not enough for it to be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And did you, off the back of that, I guess at some point that must have come to an end, or there was too big a gap for you to say, okay, well, I'm just going to wait around until they're touring again. How did you jump between that and the next kind of long, or whether you did go to a long-term one or not, or whether it was just lots of little hops?
Well, what happened was they went off to make a record. So I think they were going to be gone for a month or a month and a half, and was so no gigs or anything. And they were one of those bands who did lots of gigs, kind of dotted around rather than just like tour or touring cycle or whatever. So they had their recording time booked in, and I was kind of like, well, I'll just kick around, like maybe do some music or whatever for a bit. And then a guy called Dermot Lynch I bumped into, or he called me up or something, and he was I'd met him when I was working at Matt Snowballs, and obviously while I was at Matt's, Keane had just sort of got started, and stored their gear there, and that, you know, I got to know all their techs and stuff, and the Keane boys, and then Dermot basically said, "We're doing, you know, what are you up to? We're doing a UK arena tour, and I need a production assistant." And I was like, "I don't know what that is, you know, like, I don't know what you have to do." He's like, "It's easy, don't worry, I'll tell you." I didn't realise it meant like first up, last to bed, you know, and and basically being like his sort of civvy or whatever. But it was kind of him, and so I turned up, and we went and did this UK arena tour, and obviously I already knew half the crew and knew the boys a little bit, and on that tour I met Adam Tudhope, who's the band's manager, and you know, he said, "Oh, what do you usually do?" And I said, "Well, I work with this band, you know, they're not mega busy, but it's enough to pay the bills. And I do front of house and tour managing for them." And he said, "Oh, I've got a new artist. Would you be interested in doing a few gigs with her? It's not touring, it's just getting her off the ground." And it was Laura Marling, who has gone on to do brilliantly. So he gave me a CD, you know, of a couple of tracks. She'd done this EP, and I had listened. I was like, "Oh, this is lovely," you know, it was really nice. And so I went and did this gig. I did like 2 gigs where I was doing sound, maybe 2 or 3 gigs, and then one of the bands said, "I've got to go back to uni. I've got to do something or other." And she said, "Oh, you know, could you, you know, like, you play all the instruments, could you step in and do that, and we'll get someone else to do the sound?" And you know, that feeling, that thought that I'd had originally, that I'd just stumble into it at some point, did kind of work out. It was absolutely, you know, it was so chaotic at the time, because there was no tech of any sort, and she had lots of ideas about how she wanted to do it, but didn't know the sort of, hadn't at that point learned how to make that happen. So you know, she'd be like, "Oh, this song, can you play accordion, piano, a floor tom and bass?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "And then banjo in the middle eight." I was like, "Okay." So but so that was it, you know, and off I went doing, you know, little tours and stuff with her.
Yeah. And how long were you playing with her for?
I guess not that long, maybe like 6 months or a year. But it was, what was brilliant and you know, massively impactful for me, was that at that time there was, like, you know, for want of a better word, there was a scene, there was this West London folk thing going on, that we were kind of at the epicenter, or Laura rather was at the epicenter of, with Ben Lovett from Mumford & Sons had this club night called Communion at Notting Hill Arts Club, that he'd set up just so that his band could have a regular gig. He's in this band called Hot Rocket, which I thought was genius. He's a businessman. But so every month he'd get all his friends' bands and stuff to play, and we'd all sort of play in each other's bands. So that little thing, that scene, I mean, the number of bands that came out of it was just an artist, just extraordinary. Like, you know, Mumford & Sons, obviously. Laura Marling is still having a successful career. The Vaccines, White Lies, who else? Loads of people.
Noah and the Whale.
Yeah, obviously Irby and the gang, and Tom, and yeah, just this amazing sort of explosion of great, you know, and interesting talent. So that really had a massive impact on my life, and gave me a lot of confidence as well, I think, just sort of saying, yeah, I can play accordion on that bit and banjo on that bit, you know. And as you know, got some lifelong friendships out of that time.
And I guess it's nice to be the one-man band in smaller clubs rather than in Keane style enormodomes where you've got 60,000 people in front of you learning how to play floor tom and banjo and flute at the same time. Playing contrapuntal harmonies on on everything. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
You're right, honey.
Yeah.
My younger cousin.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was much easier doing that at, like, you know, the Dog and Duck than doing it at Wembley.
But you still have the nerves. You still have the nerves, and like the first 3 gigs where it's still, you're having to think through all of it. It's still scary stuff, isn't it? And it's a bit of a formative furnace, I suppose, isn't it? Doing 6 months with Laura meant that when you came out the back end of it, you had grown in both your skill, but also in your confidence in your abilities, which is everyone wants to make an appearance.
Hey.
Cameo, hello.
Also meet Jen.
Oh, okay. Have a great time.
So I just remembered.
All right, I might catch you up. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's good.
That's fine. My middle child, Alexia, is very fond of coming in. I'm surprised we haven't seen her yet, actually, because she knows that we're recording. So
They're off swimming.
Swimming.
We've
Wow,
got a
very
friend
nice. Well,
pool, which is a bit of a treat.
That's nice.
That's
Well,
nice.
Joe.
Yeah, it's the weather for it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't want to hold you up from going swimming too much.
No.
But let's try and let's try and rush forward to. So, were you in any other kind of? Were you a band member as opposed to gun for hire in any bands before you kind of got on board with Keane?
I had a sort of string of bands of my own that I was singing and writing in. So I had one called Unit On, one called The Ordnance, and then at the same time that I was playing with Laura, you know, it was the era of the and the somethings. So I had a band called Jeffrey Quinn and the Mets, and we were sort of, you know, fairly okay kind of folky type thing, not folk, but that, you know, that kind of sort of what do you call it? I don't know. Folk rock sounds awful. But yeah, so I was doing that, but it just wasn't really going anywhere. It might have done if I'd have stuck with it and persevered, but I just was not very good at organising stuff and didn't have much interest in that. But I did like making music, so.
You there?
Oh.
Mr. Crow? There it is.
Sorry.
So how did you then sort of go into join Keane? What happened there?
So after playing with Laura for a while, Keane they'd basically done a charity single for War Child, where the B-side was a cover of Under Pressure.
Okay.
And they were going to do these 2 shows, Brixton and Manchester Apollo, for War Child that they curated, and they had a bunch of guests doing stuff, and they wanted to play Under Pressure as part of the set, and they thought, well, we cannot.
I'm gonna need a bass player.
Yeah, you can't have the bass on track. You know, the bass starts the song. You can't have the bass on track. So they didn't. You know, it wasn't like they were planning on getting a bass player. And then Adam, the manager, rang me up and said, "Do you want to come do these gigs? You know, it's 2 gigs. You get well paid. It'll be good fun." And you know, I leapt at the opportunity. I said, "Yeah, awesome. I'd love to." And then promptly rang up, you know, a friend that was an actual bass player and asked if I could borrow his bass. I thought I can't turn up with like a totally budget, you know, dude that sometimes plays bass thing. So turned up with like a proper Fender Jazz bass, borrowed from Nick Keane. I don't know if you've come across Nick. He actually, funnily enough, ended up playing bass for Laura Marling after I left the band. But he's a brilliant musician, and I turned up and we did the 2 gigs, and they were brilliant fun. You know, obviously terrifying and thrilling to walk out on stage at Brixton Academy, and which is the kind of, for me, is like kind of the London venue.
Yeah.
Seen so many great gigs there, and then unbeknownst to the band, they were about to start recording their 3rd album. They Adam, the manager, said, "Oh, you know, you want to come and record the album with the band? We're going to be doing some of it in Berlin and blah blah blah." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." Well, he kind of hadn't talked about that with the band, but he just thought it would be great for there to be more of a band feel and for there to be able to play together without having to record. So I kind of turned up at their little studio near Tunbridge Wells and never left.
Did you sort of slot in quite easily, or was it, you know?
No, don't let it go.
Considering that the 3 of those guys have known each other since birth, basically, they were just so welcoming, and what I loved, which, you know, I didn't realise probably till later was quite out of the ordinary, was that my opinion was 100% valued and valid from day one. You know, I walked into them making their 3rd album, and, you know, talking about a time when people were still buying CDs as well. There's that. Oh, hang on one sec. Good, I'll catch you up.
Okay, I just maybe leave my left side as well, but I'm short time.
Okay. Can't remember what we were talking about then.
You walked in on them doing their record.
Yeah, so I turned up on day one with them, and we all set up, and, you know, I said straight away, "Oh, I think that bit's," you know, we started running through these songs. So I really like that bit, or maybe we should, you know, change that, or because I thought, well, I don't know, I'm not really interested in just sort of turning up and playing and then going home. I want to engage with the creative process, because, you know, otherwise I'm just going to get bored.
Yeah.
And what was brilliant was they just went for it straight away, and I think partly because it was nice for them to be able to just rattle through songs in different ways. You know, it's like, well, let's try a bit faster, let's try a different key or whatever, rather than having to sort of mess around with Logic for half an hour between run-throughs.
Yeah.
And that recording that album, Perfect Symmetry, was, I mean, it was jaw-dropping for me in so many ways, because they sort of said, right, we're going to get a night train out to Berlin and spend 2 weeks in the studio there, and, you know, off we went on this sort of, you know, in the kind of first-class cabin of this train, sitting there, and then we turned up at this 5-star hotel where we were staying for 2 weeks, and the studio was like, my flat would have fit inside the live room, I reckon, no joke, probably 15 times.
Jeez.
This is cool. So we did that, and then we went back and did another couple of weeks, and again, like, I remember the whole, the way Keane does things, which I just think is beautiful, is and this is a good example of it, is we were, you know, working on this track, and there was this assistant engineer called Uli, who was probably like 20, I think. Big budget recording studio, you know, like a serious thing. And we were doing this, working on this track, and he stood in the middle of the room with his arms folded, and he goes, "I just don't think this one sounds very good." And you can imagine, like, that the house engineer, sort of his face just pure rage and pure mortification at the same time. Our engineer just, all of us absolutely burst out laughing. What was lovely though, it was like, well, what do you think we should do? You know, and he goes, well, I don't try it up key or whatever, you know. Made a couple of suggestions and we tried them and got on with it. And, you know, I loved the fact that no one was, that when we went in the next day, he was still there.
Yeah.
Well, it probably could have gone one of two ways, couldn't it? It could have gone, like if the band had thrown all of their toys out of the pram, he probably wouldn't have been there the next day.
Yeah.
And so the band are really responsible for him still having his job the next day, which is lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also goes back to what you were saying earlier about not having any the pomp in music, just being, you know, human about it and nice and kind of just listening to other people and, you know, not thinking that you are the one and only. So quite Chesney Hawkes. You know, it's really nice to hear.
Yeah, they're good guys.
Got balloon blowing.
Yeah, well, we're trying to make this thing fly.
Okay.
So you have to blow a balloon up, and then you put it on this bit, and then it kind of flies up. I'm pretty certain it's going to go over the garden fence at some point, but
it
isn't going to go over the fence. Okay.
Positive mental attitude. That's what we like.
Yeah, he's very positive. He's learned that from his mother. Right, go. Make it fly.
So, not to keep you away from the swimming pool and your children and stuff, but what's sort of next? I mean, obviously we're locked down and everything, but at the minute, what are the plans?
Oh, also, what happened when Keane went on hiatus? Because you sort of become full member, and then were expecting to do a fair amount of touring and next album and stuff, and then that sort of didn't materialize.
Weirdly enough, despite having been made a full member on that album cycle, we'd done, you know, we'd basically done 2 full album cycles and world tours and this kind of mini album in between. And I think, in fact, that the tour that we decided to go on hiatus we were on was like a best of tour.
Right.
So
okay.
I'd done a lot with the band by then, and we'd had our first. I got married, and we'd had our first kid, and you know, I wasn't seeing much of her, and she was a baby. So I actually felt a sense of relief in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But it's I definitely did sort of feel like, well, what should I do now? I think we all did, and I don't know. It whizzed by though. I honestly thought I'd never do Keane again. I thought that's I don't need it in my life now, So we moved up to Suffolk. My dad got really ill, unfortunately, and had a really bad cancer prognosis. So we knee-jerk reaction came up to Suffolk, where I swore I'd never move back here.
Yeah.
And then he kind of clung on for about a year and a half, and I'd got a little set up, and then we started to realise actually it's lovely up here, and we feel quite at home, and some nice schools and stuff.
Yeah.
So then we decided to stay, and I thought, right, I'm going to set up like a proper place for my studio, and try and get that going, get people up here and do some good, like do something good for the community as well. So I set up this art firm called Old Jet, and that was in 2015, and it's still going strong. It's it's lovely. It's basically lots of studio and office space for the arts. But we also do kind of touring band storage, because on an airfield, loads of space.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of bread and butter of the place. So it's great because it basically means it's, sort of the rent is paid on my studio. It doesn't have to, I'm not having to run the studio as a business, which in this day and age is just so difficult, you know.
Yeah.
And are you doing, alongside Old Jet, are you managing to do music? I know Chenzo's not far from you, Chenzo Townsend, with his studio. You do bits and bobs with him sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, he's had me over doing odds and sods, bits of drumming and stuff mainly. I really like Chenzo. It was brilliant. He mixed the most recent Keane album, and it was a dream come true, really. But the thing that was really frustrating was I was like, at last, because we spend so much time in Sussex with Keane, because that's their kind of where they're all from. I thought at last we're doing something up in Suffolk, and then something came in that meant we all have to go to Australia to the States. So we weren't even there for the mixing. But yeah, he's brilliant mixer.
Yeah, sounds good.
Sorry, we're having balloon catastrophes over here.
Balloon Gate.
Yeah, this is actually the weekend, because it's half term. Well, is it half term? It would be half term this coming week, as I'm sure both of you are aware. And normally this is the week that we go up to Suffolk, up to Wits, just outside of Southwold.
Oh, nice.
So I constantly drive past Old Jet signs on the road up there, and think I really must go and see Jesse when I'm up here at some point. But the problem is it's dragging all the kids as well. And, we just want to get there and stuff, and which is fair enough.
Oh, they'd love Old Jet. There are loads of old aeroplanes kicking around and stuff.
Trust me, Tobias would really, really love that. Yeah. Next time we come up, we'll make a deviation, and we'll come and say hi.
That sounds good.
Matt, have you got anything? Sorry, I'm rather distracted now because
Tobias the balloon. No, I think
Balloon Gate.
Yeah, Balloon Gate has nicely capped the conversation. But yeah, I mean, Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time to come and have a chat and share.
Oh, no time. No problem. I didn't prattle on too much. I do tend to.
No, not at all.
It was lovely to listen to.
And it's what's really interesting, and I think going back to the point about why seeing your friend playing the drums was formative / galvanizing. That's sort of what we want these podcasts for people to be for people. So that, there's a gradual stepping stone between different things in order that people get to be a part of whatever part of the music industry it is, or creative arts or whatever. And being able to... Well, it is that, but there's also a lot. You have some kind of motive. You've got some kind of driving force which is pushing you forward, and it's clearly a desire to make things happen. And it doesn't. You can't just send emails out and expect things to happen. But what you can do is put yourself in a position where there are loads of other people around wanting the same things, and then coincidences start to happen.
Yeah, that's really all it boils down to, isn't it? Just making sure that you're at least, even if you're not playing, you're standing somewhere near the stage doing something useful.
Yeah. It's not gonna come to you. You've got to make an effort to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen to that.
True.
And there you go. And on that bombshell.
Well,
yeah, thanks so much, Jess. That's a lot of time out of your day, and I hope we haven't messed up your swimming rendezvous.
Not at all.
Enjoy it. I'm very jealous.
Oh, it would be lovely. All right. Well, hopefully I'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, that'd be wicked, man.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We'll come up to Suffolk and come and say hi when we're allowed to go out of Greater London.
Yeah.
Whenever that is.
One day.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
Cheers.
Ladies.
Catch you later.
See ya.
See ya.
Thanks, buddy.